All right, if you're just joining us, this is the review for Unit 5, the chapter dealing with particles that are too small to be measured, where we're introducing the concept of the mole. So far, we've gone through questions 1 and 2, one having to do with definitions, including a list of the different polyatomic ions. Number 2, of course, we're introducing molar mass and just finding how to calculate those. Now, let's head on to number 3. I know this kind of goes back to a little bit of an analogy that we did in class where we're looking at different types of hardware: washer, hex nut, anchor, and bolt. Now for each of those, we're given the actual mass and we're asked to provide a relative mass. Now relative mass is simply comparing the mass of each of those to each other. So what we need to keep in mind is what is the absolute smallest particle out there, and that's going to have a mass of 1. So in this case, the smallest one that we have out here is the washer nut. So that's a mass of 1.0. But what we need to find then is, in terms of relative mass, how does the hex nut compare to the washer nut? Down here, letter A says, do the calculations necessary to complete it. Divide all the masses by the smallest mass. So when it comes to the washer, it's, of course, 1.74. Divide that by 1.74. That's where we get its relative mass of 1.0. But when we compare the hex nut to the washer, we see that it's 3.16 compared to 1.74. And that's going to give us a relative mass of 1.82. 1.82. Okay, now for the anchor bolt, we don't know what its actual mass is, but we know that its relative mass is actually 3 times that of our washer, of our smallest amount. So for the anchor, we're going to set this up just a little bit different. We'll take 3 times 1.74, and that tells us that its actual mass is 5.22. So we'll go ahead and write that there, 5.22. And then finally, with the bolt, we see that its actual mass is 7.64. So for the bolt, 7.64, we're going to then say, how does that compare to our relative mass of the washer at 1.74? And that gives us 4.39. So we end up with 4.39. Now, letter B of number 3 is actually on the next page. So when we turn that over, here's a little bit of a description of letter B. And we can kind of see how that ties in with what we were just discussing. Originally, the mass was relative compared to hydrogen, which was assigned a molar mass of 1. But then in more recent years, the relative mass was carbon-12, which was assigned a mass of 12 grams per mole. And so that's why we go back to things being the actual mass versus the relative mass, and relative as they compare with each other. And that's kind of where that historical background came from. So I hope that helps for number 3.